The year was 2145. Humanity, once a powerful and expansive force in the galaxy, had fallen from grace. No longer were they the fierce warriors who shaped civilizations and ruled over vast expanses of space. Now, they were a struggling race, fighting to survive under the oppressive rule of technologically advanced alien species. Most of Earth's once proud fleet had been destroyed in brutal wars, leaving humanity with only memories of their former glory. What remained of their military might were old warships, aged relics that no longer had a place in the galaxy's modern battlefield. These ships were forgotten, abandoned to decay in remote corners of the galaxy. One such forgotten ship was the Aegis, an ancient human warship that had been stationed on a barren, desolate moon at the farthest edge of known space. The ship had been abandoned for years, its hull corroded by time, its systems barely operational. The Aegis had long been written off as an obsolete relic, one of the many discarded by a humanity that had no use for it. The crew aboard the Aegis consisted of a mix of old soldiers who had seen better days and young recruits, each of them aware that they were living in the shadow of a forgotten past. Among them was Captain Jin Silko, a seasoned officer who had spent most of his life in service to humanity. His face bore the wear and tear of countless battles, and his eyes held the weight of years spent fighting against forces much stronger than his own. Silko had been assigned the command of the Aegis for a routine mission, escorting a small convoy of vital supplies to a human colony located on the outermost edges of the galaxy. The mission was uneventful, at least on the surface, and Silko couldn't help but feel a deep sense of skepticism. The Aegis was old, its systems outdated, and most of its advanced technology had long since failed. He knew the ship was no match for the alien fleets that controlled the galaxy, and as the ship hummed along through empty space, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were headed toward disaster. The crew of the Aegis consisted of inexperienced rookies who had never seen combat and grizzled veterans who had lived through the worst of the war. They all knew that the ship was barely functional, a shadow of the mighty warship it had once been. The technology aboard the Aegis was no match for the powerful Zarian fleet that had terrorized humanity for years. The Zarians were an alien race known for their ruthlessness and advanced weaponry. They had cloaking devices that rendered their ships nearly invisible, and their weapons were capable of wiping out entire fleets with a single strike. The Aegis was a sitting duck in comparison. Silko couldn't help but wonder if the mission was a waste of time. The convoy they were escorting consisted of little more than supplies, food, medicine, and equipment for the struggling human colony. It wasn't the type of mission that required a seasoned captain or a legendary warship, yet here they were, stuck in the middle of nowhere. As the Aegis sailed through the endless void, Silko tried to keep the crew focused on their task. The rookies were nervous, their hands trembling as they sat in front of their stations. The veterans, on the other hand, were calm, knowing all too well the dangers of space. But no one could have predicted what was about to happen. Without warning, the calm of space was shattered. A sudden jolt rocked the ship as it was hit by an unseen force. The crew scrambled, alarms blaring throughout the ship as the Aegis was caught in a deadly ambush. Silko rushed to the bridge, his heart pounding in his chest. The Zarian fleet had arrived. The Zarians, as expected, were equipped with cloaking technology, rendering their ships invisible to the human crew. The Aegis's sensors struggled to pick up any signs of the enemy, and the crew was completely unprepared for what came next. A blast of energy struck the Aegis's outer hull, causing the ship to shake violently. The crew scrambled to respond, but their efforts were futile. The Aegis was outmatched, outgunned, and unable to defend itself against the Zarians' superior firepower. Silko gripped the controls, his mind racing as he realized the full extent of the danger they were in. The Zarians had them cornered. Their stealth ships could appear out of nowhere, launching devastating attacks before vanishing again into the void. Silko knew that the Aegis had no chance of surviving this encounter, and the convoy they were protecting was as good as lost. The Aegis was no longer a warship, it was a relic, a joke in the face of the advanced Zarian technology. But then, something strange happened. Just as all hope seemed lost, a low hum echoed through the ship. The sound was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it quickly grew louder. The Aegis, long dormant and thought to be useless, began to stir with life. The ship's energy systems flickered on, and for the first time in years, the ancient warship hummed with power. Lights blinked back to life, and the ship's systems slowly came online. It was as though the Aegis had been waiting for this moment, waiting for something to give it purpose again. Siako stared at the control panel in disbelief. The Aegis was powering up. The Aegis's weapons, which had long been considered useless, began to come online. Energy cannons powered up, and the shields, once thought to be useless, flared to life. The ship's AI, known as Ion, sprang to life, its once dormant systems now active. The AI began to analyze the situation, calculating the optimal response to the Zarian fleet. It was as if the ship had suddenly transformed into a living, breathing entity, a warship once more. Siako watched in awe as the Aegis targeting systems locked onto the Zarian ships. The energy weapons fired, striking the invisible ships with incredible accuracy. The Aegis began to fight back, its weapons now a deadly force that the Zarians hadn't anticipated. It was as though the ancient warship had been reborn, and the Zarians found themselves facing a foe they had never expected. For the crew of the Aegis, the impossible had become real. The ancient ship, once considered a joke, was now their last hope. Siako had always known that humanity was capable of more than the galaxy gave them credit for. He had never imagined that the Aegis would be the key to humanity's survival, but now he understood. This old warship wasn't just a relic, it was humanity's weapon of resistance. As the Aegis fought on, Siako knew that this was only the beginning. The war had just changed, and humanity was no longer going to be the underdog. The Aegis had powered up, and with it, a new hope had been born. The battle raged on as the Aegis fought for its life. The Zarian fleet, with its invisible ships, continued to pummel the ancient warship, but something was happening. The Aegis, long thought to be an obsolete relic, was no longer an easy target. Lieutenant Najia, Siako's loyal right-hand officer, couldn't believe what she was witnessing. As the battle intensified, the Aegis began to move with an uncanny precision. Its ancient systems, once thought beyond repair, were now coming to life. Jaya watched in disbelief as the ship's dormant AI core, known as Ion, suddenly powered up. The lights aboard the Aegis flickered and hummed to life, almost as if the ship itself was waking from a deep slumber. The AI systems began to assess the situation, and in a blink, the Aegis's weapon systems activated. The old energy cannons, which had been useless mere moments ago, began to glow with a fierce intensity, charging up for the first time in years. The crew stood frozen for a moment, unable to comprehend what was happening. Siako, standing on the bridge, looked at the flickering controls in front of him. The Aegis, a ship once written off as nothing more than a derelict, was now responding like it had a purpose again. The weapons, old and rusty as they might have seemed, were now cutting through the Zarian ships with terrifying accuracy. The Aegis wasn't just firing blindly, it was hitting the Zarians with deadly force, and their cloaking technology wasn't enough to protect them. "Lieutenant, what's happening?" Siako's voice was a mixture of confusion and awe. Jaya, her fingers flying over the console, tried to make sense of the data flooding in. "Sir, I don't know, but the AI is alive. The ship's systems, everything is functioning like it's brand new." As the Aegis dodged another barrage of fire, Jaya could see the shields coming online, flickering into existence with an energy field that shimmered around the ship. The shields absorbed the Zarian blasts, turning the tide of battle. The Aegis was no longer helpless. It was fighting back with a ferocity that no one had expected. Jaya's heart raced as the ship's weapons blasted through the Zarian fleet, tearing apart enemy ships that had been invisible just moments before. The Zarian commanders, initially confident of their victory, were now scrambling. They had underestimated the old warship, and now it was proving to be a deadly adversary. Siako's mind raced as the ship moved with surprising agility, dodging enemy fire and delivering powerful strikes. It was as if the ship itself had come alive, responding to their every command with precision. Jaya, still in shock at the sudden turnaround, turned to Siako. "Captain, this is impossible. The Aegis was a relic. How is it doing this?" Siako's mind was working in overdrive. He had always known that there was more to the Aegis than met the eye. It wasn't just a ship, it was something else, something more powerful. He could feel it now, as though the ship itself was becoming a part of him, guiding his every move. It was as if the Aegis had been waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to awaken its true power. "This ship is far more than a relic," Siako muttered under his breath. "It's a weapon unlike anything we've ever seen." The Zarian ships, realizing they were losing ground, began to regroup, preparing for a full-scale assault. They launched wave after wave of cloaked ships, attempting to overwhelm the Aegis with sheer numbers. But the Aegis wasn't backing down. The AI, now fully awake and operational, began calculating the optimal strategies for the battle. It was as if the ship itself had been designed for this moment, designed to fight the Zarians. Jaya's hands flew over the console as the targeting systems locked onto the Zarian ships. "Captain, we can't keep this up forever. The Zarians have more ships in reserve, and their reinforcements are almost here." Siako's gaze shifted from the screen to the view of space outside the bridge. He could see the dark silhouettes of the Zarian fleet, swarming like predators closing in on their prey. They were stronger, faster, and more numerous. But for the first time in a long while, Siako felt a spark of hope. The Aegis had awoken, and with it came the possibility of victory. "We don't have a choice," Siako said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "We fight to the end. This ship, this battle, it's humanity's last chance." Jaya nodded, her expression grim but resolute. The young crew members who had been so unsure before now stood tall, their faces determined. They had seen what the Aegis could do, and now they understood. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for humanity's future. The Aegis fired again, this time with even greater force. The energy weapons sliced through the enemy ships with surgical precision, tearing them apart in the blink of an eye. The Zarians, once so confident in their superior technology, were being overwhelmed. The Aegis wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. But the fight wasn't over yet. As the Zarian fleet regrouped, Siako knew they needed to do more than just hold their ground. They needed to take the fight to the enemy and strike a decisive blow that would turn the tide in humanity's favor. He turned to Jia, who was already working on the next move. "We need to unlock more of the ship's capabilities," Siako said, determination in his voice. "Find a way to push the Aegis beyond what it's doing now. We can't just defend ourselves. We need to go on the offensive." Jaya looked at him, her face set with resolve. "Understood, Captain." The Aegis had awakened, but Siako knew they had only scratched the surface of its true potential. The ship was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of humanity's will to survive. If they could unlock its full power, they might just have a fighting chance against the Zarian Empire. As the battle raged on, Siako realized that this was no longer just a mission. It was a fight for the future of humanity. And with the Aegis at their side, they would not go down without a fight. After the unexpected and hard-won victory against the Zarian fleet, the Aegis had barely managed to destroy a small fraction of the alien ships. The rest of the Zarian forces, enraged and desperate, began their relentless pursuit. They were not merely seeking revenge. They were bent on eradicating the Aegis and all who dared stand against them. What followed was a chase unlike anything the humans had ever faced before, a battle against an enemy that had the technological superiority and resources to crush them at any moment. The Aegis was still reeling from the last battle. The ancient warship's systems, now awake and functioning, were still in the process of adapting to the modern threats it now faced. Captain Sioko, with his unwavering leadership, knew that the real challenge had only just begun. The Aegis was now a beacon of hope for humanity, but also a prime target for the Zarians, who would stop at nothing to destroy it. With the Zarians hot on their tail, Sioko and his crew had no choice but to navigate through some of the most dangerous parts of space. The asteroid fields they flew through were like a maze, filled with floating rocks and debris that could tear the ship apart with a single wrong move. But that was not their only danger. There were ancient battle zones scattered throughout this part of the galaxy, remnants of long-forgotten wars that still held dangerous traps and weapon systems capable of destroying even the most advanced ships. Lieutenant Jaya, Sioko's most trusted officer, worked feverishly alongside the rest of the crew to keep the Aegis in one piece. Her role was crucial. She was the one who handled the ship's intricate controls and systems, ensuring that every decision made by Sioko was executed with precision. In the midst of all the chaos, Jaya's calm presence was a pillar of stability for the crew, but even she could feel the pressure mounting. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death. "Captain," Jaya said, her voice tense, "we can't keep this up much longer. We've barely got enough fuel to keep the engines running. If the Zarians catch up, we're done for." Sioko stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the stars outside. The pressure weighed heavily on him, but he didn't show it. His responsibility to the crew and humanity as a whole kept him focused. "We won't stop. We can't afford to. If we don't find a way out of here, all of this," he gestured to the vast emptiness of space, "will be for nothing." The Aegis's weapons were powerful, but they were not enough to fend off the seemingly endless Zarian fleet. The alien ships were faster, more advanced, and had the added advantage of stealth technology. They could vanish into the fabric of space, only to reappear and strike without warning. Worse yet, the Zarian forces had robotic drones, autonomous, nearly indestructible machines that could tear apart anything in their path. Each attack was a reminder that the humans were outmatched, outgunned, and running out of time. As the tension continued to rise, Jaya and Sioko began to grow closer. The long hours of navigating treacherous space terrain, avoiding asteroid clusters, and trying to outwit their alien pursuers had created an unspoken bond between them. They shared not only a duty to survive, but also the knowledge that they might not make it out alive. In these moments of quiet, their glances lingered a bit longer, their words carrying more weight than ever before. "I can't shake the feeling, Captain," Jaya confessed one night as they huddled in the control room, "that we might never make it to the colony, that all of this is just buying us more time for the inevitable." Sioko placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his eyes showing both strength and vulnerability. "We have to believe we can make it. We have to believe that something out there will give us a chance. For humanity, for everyone who's counting on us." There was a silence between them, one that spoke volumes without the need for words. They both knew the truth. They were in a race against time, and the longer they ran, the less likely it seemed that they would make it to safety. In an act of desperation, Sioko made a decision that he knew could change everything. "Set course for the anomaly," he ordered. The space anomaly was an uncharted rift in the fabric of space, a dangerous phenomenon known for distorting time and space. It was a gamble, but it was their only hope. If they didn't take the risk, the Zarians would catch up, and that would be the end of the Aegis and all aboard. The ship's engines hummed to life as they made their way toward the anomaly, the stars outside warping and twisting in strange patterns as they neared the edge of the rift. Jaya's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, the anomaly is unstable. We don't know what's on the other side. It could be a dead end or..." Just do it, Sioko interrupted, his voice filled with a rare urgency. We have no choice. The Aegis lurched as it entered the rift, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire ship would be torn apart by the forces at play. The crew braced themselves for impact, unsure of what to expect. Then, with a jolt, the world outside seemed to shift, and the ship emerged on the other side of the anomaly. The stars were different. The space around them was eerily still, as though they had entered a void where time itself had slowed. But what caught their attention more than anything else was the structure looming before them. A massive, abandoned alien military station, floating in the silence of space. It was a relic from an ancient war, its once imposing defenses now nothing more than rusted metal and decaying technology. We're alive, Jaya whispered, her voice filled with awe. But what is this place? Sioko stared at the station, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. It was the first sign of something new, a glimmer of hope in the midst of their struggle. But it was also a mystery, a place that could either be a refuge or another deadly trap. This, Sioko said slowly, might be the key to unlocking the full potential of the Aegis. They had no choice but to investigate. The abandoned alien station could hold the secrets they needed to turn the tide of this war. And just maybe, give humanity the chance it so desperately needed. The abandoned alien station loomed in front of the Aegis, a ghostly relic of a past war that still held its secrets. Sioko's decision to enter the station had been risky, but it had brought them to the very place they needed to be. Inside, the crew quickly got to work, exploring the dark corridors and rusted control rooms, hoping to find something that could turn the tide in their desperate battle against the Zarian forces. Lieutenant Jia led the team, her determination driving her as she scoured the station's systems. The crew's hearts raced, but there was a strange sense of hope in the air, something that hadn't been present since they first set foot on the Aegis. They knew this was their chance, a small flicker of possibility in the darkness. It wasn't long before they found something that made their hearts skip a beat, an ancient alien AI interface. The interface hummed to life as Jaya carefully activated it, her fingers trembling slightly. The AI was clearly old, its systems decaying and on the verge of complete failure. However, the moment the AI came online, something incredible happened. It recognized Ion, the Aegis's eye. Ion? Jaya whispered, her eyes widening in disbelief. The two AIs began to communicate, their voices echoing across the station's vast, empty halls. To the crew's astonishment, the alien AI and Ion exchanged streams of data, rapidly downloading vast amounts of technological information. The air around them seemed to pulse with energy as the two artificial intelligences merged their knowledge. What is this? Sioko asked, leaning over Jaya's shoulder as the data transferred. Jaya studied the screens, her mind racing as she absorbed the information. This is a blueprint, she muttered. The Aegis wasn't just any warship. It was designed by humanity specifically to fight the Zarians. The realization hit them like a wave. The Aegis wasn't merely a forgotten relic. It was a weapon built for this exact moment. It had been buried for a reason, hidden away because humanity knew the war with the Zarians would come, and they had prepared for it. But over time, the knowledge had been lost, and the Aegis had become a forgotten tool, left to gather dust. Now, with the power of the alien AI merging with Ion, the ship had the potential to be a weapon more powerful than anything the humans had ever dreamed of. The data unlocked a series of schematics, intricate designs for advanced weaponry and defensive systems that could level the playing field. But there was one piece of technology that stood out, a massive energy cannon, capable of dealing a crippling blow to the Zarian mothership. This is it, Jaya said, her voice filled with awe and excitement. We can do this. We can defeat them. But Sioko knew that nothing came without a cost. What's the catch? He asked, his tone cautious. Jaya's eyes darkened as she studied the blueprints. The energy core, she said slowly. It's unstable. If we use this weapon to its full potential, the core could explode. It could take out the Aegis, the Zarian fleet, and everything in its path. A heavy silence fell over the crew as the weight of the decision settled in. Siako could feel the eyes of every officer on him. They had been running for so long, always trying to stay one step ahead of the Zarians, always desperate to survive. But now, they had a chance to strike back, a chance to finally win. The energy cannon was their best shot, their only shot. Jaya looked at Siako, her face filled with both determination and sorrow. "We have to use it, Captain. There's no other way." Siako's heart pounded in his chest as he weighed the decision. They had come so far, and so many lives had already been lost in this war. Was it worth the sacrifice to stop the Zarians once and for all? Could they live with themselves if they didn't take this chance? He didn't hesitate. "We'll do it," Siako said, his voice resolute. "We will use the weapon." The crew gathered around as they began to prepare for the final battle. Their hearts were heavy with the knowledge that they might not make it out alive. Each person had a different reason for fighting. Some for family, some for freedom, some simply because they believed in humanity's right to survive. But they all shared one common goal: to stop the Zarians, no matter the cost. Lieutenant Han Min-seo, a young soldier who had only recently joined the crew of the Aegis, stood nervously in the corner of the control room. He had lost friends in the war, and the thought of potentially never seeing another day terrified him. But he also knew what was at stake. "Captain Siako," Min-seo said, stepping forward. "If we make it through this, if we survive, I'll dedicate my life to ensuring humanity never forgets what we did here. I'll make sure the sacrifice of this crew is never in vain." Siako placed a hand on the young soldier's shoulder. "You have my word, Min-seo. If we make it through this, humanity will know what you did." The countdown to battle began. The Zarian fleet was closing in, and time was running out. The Aegis had only one shot at this, one chance to unleash the weapon and take down the Zarian mothership. As the ship's crew moved into position, their faces were grim but determined. They knew the stakes. Jaya stood by Siako's side, her eyes focused on the controls. She had spent years training for this moment, but nothing could prepare her for the sheer weight of the responsibility. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve never wavered. "It's time," Siako said, his voice steady as he gave the command. "Prepare the energy cannon. Fire when ready." The hum of the ship's systems filled the air as the Aegis powered up. The Zarian fleet was almost within range. The tension was unbearable. Siako held his breath, knowing that the next few moments would determine the fate of not just the crew, but the entire human race. The energy cannon came online, crackling with raw power. The Zarian mothership loomed large on the screen, its massive size intimidating. But Siako and his crew knew they had one shot to destroy it. Firing in 3, 2, 1. The ship's entire hull shuddered as the energy cannon unleashed its devastating blast. A brilliant beam of light shot forward, cutting through space like a comet, heading straight for the heart of the Zarian mothership. And as the cannon fired, Siako knew that this battle, this final fight, would change everything. Whether they survived or not, humanity's hope had been ignited, and they had made their stand. The Aegis had never felt more alive than it did in that moment. The ship's systems were humming with power as the crew prepared for the final confrontation. In the heart of the control room, Captain Siako stood with a steady gaze, watching the Zarian fleet approach. This was it, the moment that would determine the fate of humanity. They had one shot at this, and everything hinged on their ability to take down the Zarian mothership. Around him, the crew moved with a quiet urgency. Lieutenant Jia, his right-hand officer, was monitoring the energy levels of the ship's core, her eyes scanning the fluctuating readings. Every second counted, and she knew it. The Aegis had never been this close to full power before, and there was a dangerous price to pay for pushing the ship's systems to their limit. "Captain, the energy core is starting to overheat," Jaya reported, her voice tight with tension. "If we don't stabilize it soon, we'll lose everything." Sioko didn't need to be told twice. He barked orders, and the crew scrambled to adjust the cooling systems. The Aegis had been designed for warfare, but it was ancient, and its systems weren't used to being pushed to such extremes. They were on the edge of disaster, but Sioko refused to let that stop them. The energy cannon had to be fired, no matter what. As the Aegis closed in on the Zarian mothership, the tension was palpable. The alien fleet, massive and formidable, seemed to tower over them, but the humans aboard the ship had something they didn't: the element of surprise. With the newfound power of the Aegis's weapons and the knowledge from the alien station, they were ready for this fight. Sioko glanced at Jaya, who was working furiously at her station to stabilize the core. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice resolute. "Get that core stabilized. We're not losing this fight." Jaya nodded, her fingers flying across the controls. Almost there, just a few more adjustments. The Zarian ships were closing in fast, their weapons primed and ready to destroy the Aegis. But the human crew wasn't backing down. They had been pushed to the brink too many times before, and they weren't about to surrender now. The Aegis had become more than just a ship to them. It was a symbol of humanity's defiance, a beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. As the alien ships closed in, the final battle began. The Aegis fired its newly activated weapons, sending waves of energy blasts toward the Zarian fleet. The alien ships dodged and counterattacked with deadly precision, but the humans aboard the Aegis were faster. They had learned how to use the ship's new technology, maneuvering it with agility and power that no one had expected from such an old warship. "Fire the cannon now," Sioko commanded. The ship's massive energy cannon powered up, its core glowing with a blinding light. The crew braced themselves as the cannon released a devastating beam of energy, a searing streak of light that cut through the void of space and slammed into the Zarian mothership. The explosion was immediate, a massive shockwave that rocked the surrounding area. The mothership, once an imposing force of destruction, was now nothing but a smoldering ruin in space. The crew of the Aegis cheered in triumph, but the battle was far from over. As they celebrated their victory, the ship's systems began to fail. The massive energy cannon had drained the core to its limit, and the Aegis started to tear itself apart. "Captain," Jaya shouted, "we've done it, but the ship is falling apart. The core can't handle the strain. We need to get out of here now." Sioko's heart sank. He had known this might happen. The Aegis wasn't built to survive such an overload, and now they were paying the price. The crew had a few precious minutes before the ship would be completely destroyed. "We're not abandoning ship," Sioko said, his voice calm but firm. "Everyone, brace for impact. Get to the escape pods." The crew scrambled to evacuate, but Sioko and Jaya knew there was no way to escape in time. They had done what they set out to do. They had taken down the Zarian mothership. But now the Aegis was coming apart, and their survival was no longer guaranteed. "Jaya," Sioko said, turning to her. His voice softened. "You know what we have to do." She nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "I know. We have to stay with the ship. It's the only way." The two of them stood together, watching as the ship began to disintegrate around them. The walls cracked, and the lights flickered as the Aegis succumbed to the damage. They had no time left. The energy core was on the verge of a catastrophic explosion. Sioko reached out and took Jaya's hand. "We've fought together this whole time. We've made it this far. And now, we've given humanity a chance." Jaya squeezed his hand, a tear slipping down her cheek. "We've done our part. Now it's up to them." The final moments were bittersweet. As the Aegis crumbled around them, Sioko and Jaya knew that they had made the ultimate sacrifice. A ship had fallen apart, but they had won. They had struck the decisive blow to the Zarian fleet, and in doing so, they had given humanity the chance it so desperately needed. As the Aegis began to disintegrate, Sioko and Jaya shared one last look, a silent understanding passing between them. They were at peace, knowing that they had given everything to secure humanity's future. And then, the Aegis erupted in a brilliant explosion, its energy core detonating with a force that sent shockwaves through space. The Zarian fleet, already weakened by the destruction of their mothership, was now crippled, and the remaining alien forces scattered, retreating into the void. The human race had won. In the wake of the battle, the wreckage of the Aegis drifted in space, a silent monument to the courage and sacrifice of those who had fought aboard it. Sioko, Jia, and the crew of the Aegis were gone, but their legacy would live on. The memory of their bravery, their unwavering determination, would be carried forward by those who would rebuild, by those who would rise from the ashes of this war. Humanity had won, but at a great cost. Their story would never be forgotten. The battle was over, and the galaxy had changed forever. The once invincible Zarian fleet had been obliterated, leaving the Empire in disarray. The ships that had terrorized human colonies for years were now nothing more than debris floating in the cold void of space. The grip that the Zarian Empire had held over the galaxy had been broken, and with it, a new era was born. An era where humanity, once on the brink of annihilation, had found a way to rise from the ashes. The Aegis, now a legend in its own right, had become the symbol of humanity's resilience. The ship had been more than just a war vessel. It had been a beacon of hope, a testament to the strength and courage of the men and women who had sacrificed everything to ensure humanity's survival. Captain Sioko, Lieutenant Jida, and the rest of the crew had given their lives to turn the tide of war, and now their story would inspire generations to come. Min Seo, the young soldier who had served aboard the Aegis, stood on the platform of a crowded assembly hall. His heart was heavy with grief, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He was the one chosen to return to the human colonies and tell the story of the brave crew that had given everything for the survival of humanity. As he looked out over the crowd, he could see the faces of men, women, and children, people whose lives had been touched by the sacrifices of those who had fought aboard the Aegis. He stepped forward, his voice steady as he began to speak. "We are here today because of the courage, the strength, and the sacrifices of those who fought to save us. The Aegis was not just a ship, it was a symbol of our will to survive. Captain Sioko, Lieutenant Jida, and the rest of the crew, they gave their lives so that we could live. Their names will never be forgotten. Their legacy will live on in each of us." The crowd listened in silence, hanging on every word. Min Seo spoke not just of their victories, but of the personal sacrifices, the moments of fear, and the bonds forged in the heat of battle. He spoke of the moments when the crew had come together, knowing that their mission might be their last, but still choosing to fight for a future that was worth saving. He honored Sioko and Jada for their leadership, their unwavering belief in humanity's potential, and their willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice. As Min Seo spoke, the memory of the Aegis and its crew began to take on a life of its own. Monuments were built in their honor, not just on the colonies but on every planet humanity had settled. The ship, once a tool of war, was now a symbol of hope. The technology and knowledge left behind by the Aegis were used to fuel humanity's rebuilding efforts. The power of the ancient warship, along with the alien blueprints it had uncovered, was harnessed to create new technologies, new weapons, and a stronger defense against any future threats. The human resistance, once a small and desperate movement, became a force to be reckoned with. Other alien civilizations that had long been under the Zarian Empire's thumb began to take notice of humanity's rise. The human spirit, once underestimated by so many, had proven its power. The galaxy was filled with stories of the humans who had dared to stand against the Zarians and win. Humanity had not just survived, they had fought back. The Zarian Empire, though still strong, was forever shaken. Their motherships no longer ruled the galaxy with impunity, and their grip on the human colonies had loosened. Their fleet, once an unchallenged force, was in tatters, and the fear they had instilled in the hearts of so many now gave way to the rising tide of rebellion. Humanity was no longer a passive victim. They were a force of change, a symbol of defiance to the alien oppressors. But the war was not over. The Zarians, though weakened, were still a formidable force. There would be more battles, more sacrifices to be made, but humanity was ready. The ages had shown them what was possible when they stood united, when they put aside their differences and fought for a common cause. The story of HFY and the rest of the crew would never be forgotten, and their example would continue to inspire those who came after them. As humanity began to rebuild, there was a renewed sense of purpose. No longer would they hide in the shadows, waiting for the next attack. They would face whatever came their way head-on, just as the crew of the Aegis had done. The galaxy, once filled with uncertainty, now seemed full of possibilities. Humanity had proven that they could fight back, that they could overcome even the greatest of odds. They had become a force to be reckoned with, and their legacy would live on for generations to come. Min-Seo, having fulfilled his mission, returned to the human colonies. His heart ached with the weight of what he had lost, but he knew that the crew of the Aegis had given their lives for something far greater than themselves. Their sacrifice had paved the way for a new era where humanity was no longer a prey to be hunted, but a proud and powerful force in the galaxy. The war may not have been over, but humanity was no longer fighting alone. They had a future now, a future built on the sacrifices of those who had given everything to ensure that humanity would survive. The galaxy would soon come to know what humanity had always known, that when pushed to the brink, there was no force more powerful than the will of the human race. The story of HFY, of the Aegis and its crew, would live on forever, inspiring not just humanity, but all those who had been oppressed, all those who had been denied the chance to fight for their freedom. Their story was one of sacrifice, of strength, and of an unbreakable will to survive. And so, with the Zarian Empire still reeling from its defeat, a new era began for humanity, a new era of hope, resilience, and an unshakable belief that anything was possible when humans stood together.